Everybody get inside before somebody gets hurt. Elijah Brooks said those 7 words at midnight. Soaking wet, broke 3 days from losing everything he had ever loved and opened his garage door to 120 strangers who had no idea they were about to witness something that would change all of their lives forever. If you believe one good man can still move the world, stay with me until the very end of this story. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from, because I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The eviction notice had been sitting in Elijah Brooks' front shirt pocket for 11 days. Not in a drawer, not on the counter. In his pocket, close to his chest, right next to his heart. He put it there on purpose. Because Elijah Brooks had spent 42 years learning that the things that could kill you, the real things, the ones that came for your spirit and not just your body, those things needed to be kept close. Kept where you could feel them every single hour of every single day. Because the moment you forgot about them, the moment you looked away, that was the moment they buried you. He was 70 years old, and he was not ready to be buried. Not yet. The garage, Brooks Motorcycle Repair Highway 61, just outside of Clarksdale, Mississippi, smelled the same way it had smelled for 42 years. Motor oil and steel, and something underneath all of it, something older. Something that reminded Elijah of his father's hands. His father had been a mechanic too. Not motorcycles, cars, old American steel. He used to say that every machine had a heartbeat, and a good mechanic didn't just fix engines, he listened to them. Elijah had been listening to engines his entire life. Right now, the only engine he could hear was the distant rumble of thunder moving in from the southwest and the weak, desperate cough of the space heater in the corner of the garage that was running on its absolute last legs, same as everything else in this building. He sat on his old wooden stool, the one with the crack down the left leg that he'd been meaning to fix for 6 years, and he looked around at what 42 years of work looked like when the bank was about to take it away from you. Tools hanging on pegboards he'd built himself. A 1969 Harley-Davidson Sportster sitting on a lift he'd welded together from scrap metal in 1987. Photographs covering every inch of the walls, customers' bikes, smiling faces, dozens of them, hundreds of them, people who had come through this door with broken machines and left with something that ran again. 2 coffee mugs on the workbench. One of them. His son Daniel's exactly where Daniel had left it the last time he'd visited. That had been 4 years ago. Daniel Brooks had been 29 years old, a Marine, 6 feet 1 inch tall, had his mother's smile in his father's hands, could strip a carburetor in under 4 minutes and put it back together blindfolded, and he'd proven that once on a bet with a group of younger mechanics who hadn't believed him. And Elijah had stood in the corner of this very garage watching his son work and thinking that he had never been prouder of anything in his entire life. Daniel had talked about doing a cross-country ride before his 30th birthday, coast to coast. He had a route plan. He'd shown it to Elijah 3 separate times. Always laughing, always with that energy he had, that forward-leaning energy, like he was always moving towards something good. He never got to take that ride. The accident wasn't on a motorcycle. It wasn't in combat. It was a Tuesday afternoon in February, an ordinary Tuesday, and a semi-truck ran a red light in Memphis, and that was the end of it. That fast, that sudden, that completely without warning or ceremony or any sense that the universe understood what it was taking. Elijah had not cried at the funeral. He'd stood straight. He'd shaken hands. He'd accepted the flag from the honor guard. He'd driven home alone and walked into this garage and sat on this stool and put his hands flat on this workbench and stayed there for 4 hours without moving. Then he got up and went back to work, because that was what you did. That was what Elijah Brooks did. His wife, Margaret, had gone 8 years before Daniel. Cancer, slow and then sudden, the way cancer worked, the way it let you think you had more time than you actually did. After Margaret, Elijah had this garage. After Daniel, Elijah had this garage. It was the only constant that had outlasted everything else in his life, and now the bank was going to take it in 72 hours unless he could produce $4,300 that he absolutely did not have. He'd applied for 3 small business loans in the last 2 years. All 3 denied. He was too old. The economy was too uncertain. Their property value had shifted. There was always a reason, always a polite letter that said no without quite saying no in a way you could argue with. He'd asked 2 longtime customers if they could help. Both had said they wished they could. He believed them. He had $12 and some change in his wallet, 2 cans of soup and half a box of crackers in the little cabinet behind the workbench, a tank of Mike and gas in his truck that was maybe a quarter full, and a space heater that sounded like it was considering retirement. Outside, the thunder was getting closer. Elijah looked up at the roof. 3 separate spots where it leaked. He'd put coffee cans underneath them. The coffee cans were already showing the stain rings of 100 previous storms. He pulled the eviction notice out of his pocket, unfolded it, read it again, not because he'd forgotten what it said, but because he had this habit, this discipline, of looking directly at difficult things. His father had taught him that too. He said men who looked away from hard things never learned to deal with them. They just got surprised over and over again by the same problems. Elijah had not been surprised by very much in 70 years. He folded the notice back up, put it back in his pocket, patted it once like you'd pat something you were making a promise to. Then the rain started. Not a slow build, not a warning. Mississippi storms didn't do warnings. One minute the air was heavy and charged and smelling of copper and wet earth, and then the sky simply opened up like a door someone had kicked in, and the rain came down so hard and so fast that the gravel parking lot in front of the garage turned to running water in under 3 minutes. Lightning hit somewhere close enough that the electricity in the garage stuttered, went out for 2 full seconds, then came back at about half strength. The fluorescent lights above his workbench flickered and buzzed. The space heater kept coughing. Elijah stood up, walked to the garage door, and looked out at Highway 61. The road was already running with water, flash flood conditions. He'd lived in this county his entire life. He knew what that road looked like when the big storms hit, and right now it looked like a river that hadn't decided yet how big it wanted to be. "Lord," he said quietly, not dramatically, just conversationally, the way a man talked to God when they'd known each other long enough to skip the formalities. "You got something in mind here?" The thunder answered him. It was not a subtle answer. He was about to go back inside when he heard it. A sound underneath the storm. A mechanical sound. A sound he had been trained by 4 decades of experience to recognize even through wind and rain and the white noise of a Mississippi downpour. An engine, then 2 engines, then 10. He stood very still. 20, 30. He stepped out from under the overhang into the rain, and he stood there getting soaked. And he looked down Highway 61, and what he saw coming through the dark and the storm was something he would spend the rest of his life trying to find the right words to describe. A line of headlights stretching back into the distance. Motorcycle headlights, in pairs and clusters, moving slow, moving, careful moving, like a long chain of something desperate, trying to find solid ground. They turned into his lot, all of them. One after another, the motorcycles rolled off the highway and into the gravel lot in front of Brooks Motorcycle Repair. And they kept coming, and they kept coming, and Elijah stood in the rain and counted and stopped counting somewhere around 80 because the number had stopped being the point. The point was that these people needed help. He could see it before anyone said a word. Riders pulling off helmets with hands that were shaking from cold. An older man in the back of the group bent over his handlebars like he was having trouble staying upright. A woman helping another rider off a bike, talking to him softly, checking his hands, checking his face. Motorcycles with water in their system's engines, coughing and sputtering, a few that had died completely on the turn into the lot and were being pushed in by hand. And then she was in front of him. She came through the crowd like she'd been doing it her whole life, direct, no wasted motion. Her gray blonde hair plastered flat to her head by the rain. Her riding jacket soaked through her eyes, steady and focused, and carrying the kind of calm that only comes from a person who has learned not to panic. Because panic is a luxury that leaders cannot afford. She was maybe 50-52 with a face that had earned every line on it and wasn't apologizing for any of them. She stopped 3 feet in front of Elijah, looked him in the eye. "My name is Rebecca Lawson," she said. "People call me Becky. I'm the ride captain for the Mississippi Valley Veterans Memorial Ride. We've got 120 riders. We've got 6 motorcycles that are non-operational and 3 more that are marginal. We've got 2 riders showing early signs of hypothermia. One of them is 74 years old and I'm worried about him. Every shop for 50 miles is dark, and your lights are the only lights I could find." She paused 1 second, just one. "I'm not going to tell you we deserve your help. We're strangers, but I am going to ask for it, straight out. Will you help us? Elijah looked at her for a moment, looked past her at the crowd of wet, exhausted, shivering people filling up his gravel lot, looked back at her. How long you been in charge of that many people? He asked. She blinked. It wasn't the response she'd expected. 12 years. He nodded like that answered something. You eat anything tonight? I know, we were trying to make the next town before the storm hit. None of you did. No, sir. Elijah turned around, grabbed the handle of the large rolling garage door, hauled it up. The light from inside billowed out into the rain and hit the crowd, and he actually heard the collective sound of 120 people exhaling at the same time. Everybody get inside, he said loud enough to carry over the storm before somebody gets hurt. Nobody moved for exactly 1 second. Then everybody moved at once. They came in quiet at first, the way people come into a church they've never been in before, looking around, taking it in, not wanting to touch anything. But the garage was not that big, and there were 120 of them, so quiet and careful gave way pretty fast to the practical reality of 120 wet human beings trying to share a space. Elijah moved. He did not stand and watch and organize from a distance. He moved. You two, he pointed it at a pair of younger riders near the door. Push those 2 bikes to the left wall and leave the center clear. I need working space. He moved to the corner, started pulling gear, extension cords, drop lights, the heavy diagnostic equipment he used for electrical troubleshooting. Becky, he said, not looking up, already working. Which rider is the one you're worried about? She was beside him in 3 steps. Back left, gray jacket, his name is Harold. He's 74. He was shaking so badly I made him stop riding 15 minutes ago. His son has been walking him. Get him to the stool next to the heater right now and bring his son. I want somebody who knows him to stay with him. Elijah was already moving toward the small cabinet, pulled it open, 2 cans of soup, a can of beans. He was doing math in his head, the kind of math that didn't require a calculator. 120 people, 2 cans of soup, a can of beans, some crackers. No math in the world made that work. He pulled out the soup anyway. Mr. Brooks, said a voice behind him. He turned. A young man, maybe 22. Mexican-American, dark eyes, a Marine's tattoo on his forearm, soaking wet and trying very hard not to show that his teeth were chattering. Is there something I can do to help, sir? Elijah looked at the tattoo. Marine. Yes, sir, Junior. My dad's the one, you're the one near the heater. Something moved through Elijah's face. Just for a second, a shadow of something. Then it was gone and he was handing the young man the cans of soup. There's a hot plate on that second shelf. There's a pot on the bottom shelf. Make that hot, every drop of it. He looked at the young man directly. Your dad's going to be fine. Keep him talking. Keep him awake. You hear me? Yes, sir. Don't call me sir. Elijah. Yes, sir, Elijah. He almost smiled. Almost. He didn't have time to smile. He went to the first motorcycle. Her name was Denise the rider. She was 47 from Alabama, and she was standing beside her bike with her arms crossed and the look of a woman preparing herself for bad news. The engine just died on the highway. It was fine, and then it just... I know. Elijah was already looking. His hands were moving before his mind finished the sentence. He had seen this pattern 1,000 times, the specific combination of a wet electrical system and a compromised ignition module. It was common in older bikes that had spent too much time in storage and not enough time in someone's care. Ignition module, he said, probably flooded. How old is this bike? 2009. I bought her used. She'd been sitting before this trip. Denise looked at him. About 8 months. I had some things going on. All right. He didn't ask about the things. Her business was her business. I can fix it. It's going to take me about 40 minutes on this one. He looked up at her. You a veteran? She lifted her chin slightly. Army. 2 tours, Iraq. He nodded, put his hand briefly on the seat of her bike. She's going to run again. Denise looked at him for a moment, and then she looked away, and she did it quickly, the way people do when they're trying to keep their face from doing something they haven't decided yet whether they want to do. He was already moving to the next bike. This was the thing about Elijah Brooks that nobody outside this county had ever really seen. He was not a slow man. He was not a quiet, sleepy old man mechanic who shuffled around and needed extra time and had to think through everything twice. When he was truly working, he moved with a focus and a speed and a precision that had startled young mechanics for decades. He had techniques that he developed himself through trial and error and decades of solving problems that the manuals didn't cover. Because in Clarksdale, Mississippi, you couldn't always order the exact right part and you couldn't always follow the exact right procedure, so you learned to think, to improvise, to understand what a machine actually needed rather than just what the textbook said to give it. He'd fix 3 bikes in 45 minutes. Word was spreading through the crowd. People were watching him, not in an obvious way, not standing around openly staring, but he could feel it, the subtle shift in the room, the way conversations would pause when he passed, the way eyes would follow his hands. "How you doing that?" asked a voice. He looked up. A man, maybe 60 barrel-chested tattoos from his wrist to his collar face, like a man who had not asked many people for anything in a long time. He was watching Elijah's hands with an expression that was half curiosity, half something closer to disbelief. "Doing what?" Elijah said without stopping working. "That bike was dead. I checked it myself. I've been working on bikes for 30 years. I said it was dead." "Wasn't dead," Elijah said. "Just needed somebody to listen." The man was quiet for a moment. "What's your name?" "Elijah Brooks." "How long you been doing this?" 42 years. The man was quiet again. "Then my name's Roy. You need an extra set of hands." Elijah looked at him, assessed him quickly the way he assessed everything efficiently and without judgment. "You know electrics?" "Well enough." "Get over here." Roy got over there. By the second hour, Elijah had an unofficial crew of 6 people who had self-organized around him, handing him tools, holding lights, doing the tasks he delegated without being asked twice. He hadn't asked for any of them. They had simply appeared, pulled into orbit by the work itself. The garage smelled like soup now. The young man Junior had made every drop count, had somehow stretched 2 cans of soup and a can of beans into something that at least gave everybody something warm to hold and something hot to sip. Becky had organized it, moving through the crowd with cups, making sure the older riders and the ones still shaking got priority. Elijah watched that too, even while he worked. He noticed things. He always noticed things. He noticed the old man, Harold, sitting by the heater, color slowly coming back into his face, talking in a low voice to his son. He noticed a young woman in the corner who wasn't talking to anyone, sitting with her helmet in her lap, staring at something that wasn't in this room. He noticed a heavy-set man with a white beard who had been quietly picking up every coffee cup and wrapper and piece of debris off the garage floor without being asked, just going around and cleaning because it needed doing. He noticed the quiet man in the back. He'd noticed him from almost the beginning, actually, which was unusual, because the quiet man had made no noise and asked for nothing and stood slightly away from the main body of the group, watching. Just watching. He was older. Elijah put him at maybe mid-60s, possibly older. It was hard to tell. He was wearing riding gear that was good quality but not flashy. He had a calm face, the kind of calm that was not emptiness, but was actually a very full stillness, if that made sense, the kind of calm that came from a person who had learned how to be completely present. He was watching Elijah work, not casually, deliberately, the way a person watches something when they're actually trying to understand it. Elijah made a mental note and went back to the bike in front of him. The 4th hour was when the rain began to feel personal. The roof was leaking in all 3 of its spots, and the coffee cans were filling up, and the sound of rain hitting metal at high volume was constant and present and loud enough that you had to speak clearly to be heard. The electricity was still giving trouble. The lights dipped twice long enough both times that people's conversations stopped mid-sentence, and in the silence during the second dip, Elijah heard someone say quietly, "Please don't go out." The lights came back. A few people exhaled. Elijah kept working. "You're not going to stop, are you?" said Becky. She was beside him again. He didn't know when she'd appeared. She had a cup of something hot, and she held it out toward him like a question. He looked at it, took it, drank. It was the beans. Tasted like the best thing he'd had in a week, which was probably accurate. "Got 4 more bikes to go," he said. "It's almost 3 in the morning." "I know what time it is." She studied him for a moment. "Why are you doing this?" He thought about that. Not because the answer wasn't there, but because he wanted to give her the real answer, not just the first answer. "Because they need it," he said finally, "and I can." She kept studying him. That's it. What else would there be? She looked at him for a long moment, and something happened in her expression that was hard to name. It wasn't pity. It wasn't admiration exactly. It was more like recognition. Like she was seeing something she'd spent a while looking for. You have a family, Elijah. He kept his eyes on the bike. Had. She heard the word correctly. She didn't push it. I had a son, he said without planning to. Daniel, he was a Marine too. He nodded toward the tattoo on Junior's forearm without looking up. He loved motorcycles, was going to do a cross-country ride before he turned 30. He paused, let his hands do the work. He didn't get to do it. Becky was quiet. This ride you're all doing, Elijah said. Veterans Memorial. Yes, we do it every year. Different route. We stop at memorials, veterans cemeteries. We have 23 riders who lost someone. And some of us, she paused. Some of us are the someones who were almost lost. He looked at her then, really looked. There were things in her eyes that she wasn't saying out loud, and he didn't ask about them because some things didn't need to be asked about. They just needed to be acknowledged. He acknowledged them with the look, and she nodded just barely, and that was enough. He went back to work. Midnight rolled into 1, into 2, into 3, and somewhere in the 4th hour, something shifted in the garage. It stopped being a room full of strangers taking shelter and became something harder to name. People were talking, really talking. Not small talk, the kind of talking that happens when normal boundaries come down because the conditions don't support normal boundaries. Stories were being told. Laughter was happening in the corners. The young woman who'd been staring at nothing in the corner was now sitting with 2 older women who had their arms around her and were telling her something quietly but with conviction. Roy, the barrel-chested man who'd been working alongside Elijah since the 2nd hour, looked over at him during a brief pause. You know, he said, I rode into a lot of places over 40 years, a lot of stops, a lot of garages, a lot of towns. He shook his head slowly. Never had a night like this. Storms will do that, Elijah said. Roy looked at him. I'm not talking about the storm. Elijah kept his eyes on the bike. The quiet man in the back was still watching. By the time the 5th hour arrived, Elijah's back was talking to him. Not gently, loudly, like it had something important to say and it was no longer willing to be polite about it. His hands ached. His knees ached. The coffee he'd drunk 2 hours ago had stopped working. He did not slow down, because there were still motorcycles that couldn't run. And there were still people who needed to get where they were going. And Elijah Brooks had made a promise the moment he opened that door, not out loud, not in words, but in the only currency that had ever really meant anything to him. The currency of showing up and doing the work. His father's voice from 40 years back, Elijah, boy, the work doesn't care how you feel about it. It just needs to be done. He kept working. He was on the 9th bike, a beautiful 2007 Harley Road King that had taken a lot of water and needed real attention when he heard footsteps stop behind him. Close, very close. He didn't look up immediately. He finished the check he was doing, made a note of what he was seeing, then straightened and turned. The quiet man. Up close, he was older than Elijah had estimated. Late 60s, maybe early 70s. Gray at the temples and through his short beard. Eyes that had the specific quality of eyes that had watched a very great deal for a very long time. He was holding his helmet in both hands loosely, the way you hold something you are comfortable with. The way you diagnose that ignition issue on the 3rd bike, the man said without preamble, without introduction. You didn't use a meter. Elijah looked at him. Didn't need one. You went by sound and feel and the specific way she was hesitating. He paused. You know bikes. A little, the man said, more than a little. The man almost smiled. I've spent some time around them. He looked at the Road King. May I ask you something? Go ahead. The technique you used on the fuel delivery system on the 6th bike. I've never seen that done that way. Where did you learn it? Elijah looked at him for a moment, evaluating, trying to read the question. I didn't learn it anywhere. I figured it out. Spent 2 days on a similar problem about 15 years ago. Bike belonging to a minister who needed to get to his daughter's wedding. Made it right. Remembered how? He shrugged. Problems have solutions. Sometimes you've got to make the solution yourself. The man was quiet for a moment. Then, how many motorcycles did you say you've worked on? Didn't say, but the answer is I stopped counting somewhere past 8,000. The quiet man looked at him for a long, still moment. My name is William, he said. Elijah. They shook hands, firm, direct, the handshake of two men who had both worked with their hands their whole lives. You've been watching me work for 4 hours, Elijah said. William didn't look embarrassed about it. Yes, he said simply. Why? The man considered the question carefully, like it deserved a careful answer. Because, he said finally, I have spent my entire adult life around motorcycles, and I have met, I think, almost every kind of person who works on them. And I have never, he stopped, seemed to decide something. I have never seen anyone do what you do in the way that you do it. Elijah looked at him. He was tired, his back hurt. He had $11 in his wallet and an eviction notice in his pocket, and he hadn't slept in 20 hours. He said, well, that's kind of you to say. And he went back to work. He did not ask William his last name. He did not ask what William did for a living. He did not think about it again until much later. Because right then there were still 2 motorcycles that couldn't run, and it was 4:30 in the morning, and the rain outside was finally beginning to slow. The dawn was coming. He could feel it. He always could. The last 2 motorcycles took him until 5:47 in the morning. He knew the exact time because the old clock on the wall, the one Margaret had given him for their 20th anniversary, the one with the crack across the face from the time a customer's helmet had fallen off a shelf and hit it, that clock made a specific sound at 1:45 and on the hour, a small mechanical click before the minute hand moved, and he had heard it click through every 15-minute mark from midnight until now. It was the kind of sound that became a heartbeat when everything else went quiet enough, and in the last hour of his work, with the rain finally pulling back to a low murmur against the roof, and the crowd inside the garage settling into the particular, exhausted stillness of people who had stopped fighting sleep. That clock was the only thing keeping time in a world that felt like it had stepped outside of time entirely. He set down his wrench, straightened up slowly the way a man straightens when his back has been making arguments for 3 hours, and he has been losing the debate, but refusing to concede. All 6 disabled motorcycles were operational. Every single one. He wiped his hands on the rag he kept folded over his left shoulder. A habit 42 years old. The rag was always over the left shoulder, and he looked at the 6 bikes lined up against the wall, and he felt the thing he always felt when the work was finished. Not pride exactly, something quieter than pride. Something closer to the feeling of a debt paid. Like the universe had presented a problem, and he had answered it the way he believed problems deserved to be answered. Completely. Without shortcuts. Without excuses. All of them, he turned. Becky was behind him. She'd been awake the entire night. He knew that because every time he'd looked up from the work, every single time she was somewhere in that garage moving, checking on people, making sure the older riders had something warm, making sure nobody was in real trouble. She looked like a woman who was running on the specific fuel that duty produced, the kind that burned clean and left nothing behind. All of them, he said. She stared at him. Then she looked at the 6 bikes, then back at him, and for the first time since she'd walked through his garage door, something in her face broke open just slightly, just at the edges. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes went bright for a second. She turned her head 45 degrees like she was looking at something on the wall, which she wasn't, which was just the direction a person's face goes when they're trying to keep it together. Becky, he said quietly, give me a second. He gave her a second. She turned back, composed, mostly. How, she said. It wasn't really a question. It was more like a word she said instead of the dozen other words that were lined up behind it. They weren't as far gone as they looked, he said. Mostly water, mostly cold. Machines don't handle cold and wet any better than people do. He paused. They just needed someone to warm them back up. She looked at him for a moment that lasted longer than moments usually last. Then she did something he hadn't expected. She reached out and put her hand on his forearm, just briefly, the way you touch someone when words have reached their limit. Thank you, she said. He nodded once. That was all. She straightened, turned toward the crowd, drew herself up, and then in a voice that carried clearly across every corner of that garage, she said, everybody listen up. The room came to attention the way crowds do when someone who's earned authority speaks. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. The young woman in the corner, who'd finally fallen into a light sleep against the wall, blinked awake. "I need everyone to hear this," Becky said. "All 6 bikes are fixed. Every single one. This man," she pointed at Elijah, which he hadn't expected, and which made him immediately want to look at something else. "This man worked through the entire night. He fed us. He kept us warm. He fixed our bikes, and he refused payment every time we offered it." She paused. "Let that land. I want every one of you to look at him. Look at him and understand what we're looking at. Because I have been running this ride for 12 years, and I have never," her voice caught just for a half second, just enough to be real, "I have never seen anything like this." The garage was so quiet you could hear the drip of water into the coffee cans. Then Roy started clapping. Not the polite kind, the real kind. The kind that comes from the hands of a man who doesn't give it easily, and that's exactly what it sounded like. And then the whole garage was clapping. 120 people in a leaking garage in Clarksdale, Mississippi at 5:47 in the morning, clapping for a 70-year-old mechanic who was standing there with a rag over his shoulder and grease on his hands, and the posture of a man who genuinely did not know what to do with any of this. He looked at the floor. He nodded. He said, all right. The way people say things when they're trying to make something stop, not because they don't appreciate it, but because it's hitting somewhere they're not sure they're ready to be hit." Roy stopped clapping first. He walked straight up to Elijah and put out his hand. "I've worked alongside a lot of men," he said, "in garages, in the military, in places a lot harder than this." He shook his hand once firmly. "I'm honored." Elijah shook back. "You were good help. Don't change the subject." "Go get some sleep, Roy." Roy laughed, an actual laugh, and walked away. And that's when Elijah noticed that the quiet man William was standing near the back wall, still watching, and that he had not clapped, not because he wasn't moved, but because his attention was too focused for clapping. He was watching Elijah the way you watch something you're trying to permanently memorize. Elijah noticed, filed it, didn't know what to do with it yet. The sky outside was beginning to change. Not sunrise yet, but the deep blue-black of the sky lightening. At the very lowest edges, the first signal that morning was somewhere in the building. The rain was down to almost nothing. The highway, when Elijah looked at it, was still wet, but no longer running. The flooding had moved on or settled down or done whatever flooding did when the storm stopped insisting. People were moving now. The energy in the garage had shifted from sheltering to preparing. Riders checking their gear, helmets coming off laps where they'd been held through the night and going onto heads, zippers, gloves, the small rituals of people getting ready to ride again. Becky came back to him. She had something in her hand, an envelope. "No," Elijah said before she'd said a word. "Elijah." "I said no. We took a collection. Everyone contributed. There's Becky." He said her name in a way that was not harsh and was not soft. It was the way you say a name when you need the person to understand that you're being completely serious and also that you're not going to repeat yourself. "I didn't do this for money. I know that. That's not why we're giving it to you. We're giving it to you because nothing." He said it gently. "Put it back. Buy your rider's breakfast. It's a long road." She held the envelope for a moment. Her expression went through 3 or 4 things in quick succession: frustration, understanding, respect, something that might have been grief, and then she lowered it. "You're impossible," she said. "I've been told." She looked at him. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled. Not a polite smile, a real one, the kind that happened against a person's will because the situation earned it. "My husband," she said, "was like you." The past tense of that sentence sat in the air between them for a moment. "He passed," Elijah asked. 4 years ago, Kabul. He was a contractor, civilian side. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near." She stopped. Reset. "He went because someone needed help. That was his answer to everything. Someone needs help, you go." She looked at the envelope in her hand. "He would have liked you." Elijah was quiet for a moment. "Tell me his name," he said. She looked up at him. "His name," Elijah said again. "Tell me." "Marcus," she said. "Marcus Lawson." Elijah nodded slowly, repeated the name once quietly, like he was making sure he'd carry it correctly. He sounds like a man worth knowing. She nodded, pressed her lips together. Then we do this ride every year, partly for him. He's one of the names on the list. She looked away. He never got to do the ride with me. We were going to do it together. When he got back. Another pause, shorter this time. He didn't get back. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Elijah said, "My son Daniel, he was a Marine. He had a ride planned too, cross country, had the whole route mapped out. Used to show it to me and talk about it like it was already done, like he was already remembering it." He stopped. He didn't get to do his either. Becky looked at him. "He died 4 years ago," Elijah said. "Not in service. Truck hit him on a Tuesday in Memphis. An ordinary Tuesday." He said the word ordinary like it was the most painful part of the sentence, which it was. Because it was. The ordinariness of it. The complete refusal of the universe to provide a reason that made any sense. He was 29. The garage was still moving around them, riders preparing gear being checked, but in this particular 3 feet of space, everything was very still. "I'm so sorry," Becky said. And she said it the right way, not quickly, not as a formality, but slowly and with weight and looking directly at him. "He's why I opened the door," Elijah said. He hadn't planned to say it. It came out because it was true, and truth had a way of coming out when you were tired enough to stop guarding it. "When you all pulled in, when I looked at all of you out there in the rain." He stopped, started again. "Daniel would have done exactly what you all are doing, the memorial ride, the veterans, all of it. It would have been exactly his kind of thing." He looked at the wall, at the photographs, at 42 years of faces. "So when you pulled in, I wasn't just seeing 120 strangers." Becky put her hand on his arm again. This time she didn't take it away quickly. Then a voice cut through the moment. "Hey, Roy," loud. Not rude, Roy didn't seem to do rude, but urgent. "Hey, Elijah, we've got a situation." Both of them looked up. Roy was standing near the garage door, and beside him was Junior Harold's son and Harold himself. Harold was on his feet, which was good. His color was back, which was better. But his face was set in a way that said something was happening that he wasn't happy about. Elijah crossed the garage in 8 steps. "What's the problem?" he asked. Harold looked at him, 74 years old, built like a man who had been large once and was still carrying the frame, even if some of the weight had redistributed. Vietnam-era tattoos on his forearms. Eyes that had been frightened earlier in the night and were now something else, entirely determined and maybe ashamed and definitely working very hard to be neither. "My bike," Harold said. "What about it?" "She won't start." He said it quietly, like it cost him something to say it. Elijah looked at Junior, who gave a small, confirming nod. "Which one?" "The Blue Road King. The old one." Elijah had worked on that bike. The 2007 Road King. That was the 9th bike he'd touched. He had brought it back. He was certain of that. He was certain because he was always certain when a job was done, not because of arrogance, but because he didn't leave a bus until he was. "Show me," he said. They walked to the bike. Elijah put his hand on her, ran his fingers along the fuel tank down to the engine casing the way you put your hand on a person's forehead when you think they might have a fever. Feeling, listening with his hands. Then he crouched down, looked at the ignition, stood back up. "Your kill switch," he said. Harold stared at him. "Right handlebar, kill switch. It got bumped to off, probably when you were walking it in last night." A silence. Harold reached over, flipped the switch, pressed the starter. The Road King fired up like she'd never had a problem in her life. A deep, clean, perfectly tuned sound that filled the entire garage and bounced off every wall and made a dozen riders nearby break into spontaneous applause. Harold stared at his running motorcycle. Then he looked at Elijah. And for a moment, just a moment, the 74-year-old Vietnam veteran looked like something considerably younger and considerably more fragile, and his son put a hand on his shoulder, and Harold put his hand on top of his son's hand. "Thank you," Harold said. "Kill switch," Elijah said. "Check it first always, before anything else." Harold laughed, a genuine full-chest laugh that startled him as much as it startled everyone near him. 40 years riding, and I've told that to 300 people. Kill switch." He shook his head. You'd think I'd remember. You had a rough night, Elijah said. We all did, Harold said, but some of us handled it better than others. He looked at Elijah with the specific steadiness of a man who is making sure that what he's about to say is properly received. I want you to know something. I'm going to tell this story for the rest of my life. What happened in this garage tonight? I'm going to tell it to my grandchildren. You understand what I'm saying? I appreciate that, Elijah said. I mean it. I know you do. Elijah looked at the bike. She's going to ride clean all the way home. I want you to stop if you feel the cold coming back into your hands. Don't push it. Yes, sir. Elijah almost corrected him the way he'd corrected Junior, then didn't. Let Harold have it. The convoy was organizing. The energy in the garage had shifted again, sharper now, the focused energy of riders preparing to move. The light outside was real morning light, now gray and clean and washing the edges off everything. Becky was up front organizing the order of departure, calling out instructions in that clear carrying voice, and the 120 people were responding with the efficiency of a group that had spent years doing this together. Elijah stood near the workbench and watched them get ready to leave. He was not sad exactly. He was something more complicated than sad. He was full and empty and tired and awake all at the same time in the way that only happened to him at the end of very long nights when he had given everything he had to give and come out the other side wondering what exactly he was going to do now that it was over. Can I ask you something? The voice was young. He turned. The young woman from the corner, the one who'd been staring at nothing when they first came in. She was 25, maybe 26, with short, dark hair and the posture of someone who'd recently been in a very hard place and was working on standing up straight again. I'm Carla, she said. I was Marcus Lawson's niece. Becky's my aunt. Elijah looked at her. I heard what you said to her about your son. She hesitated. About it being an ordinary Tuesday. He nodded. My dad died on an ordinary Wednesday, she said. In a parking lot, heart attack. He was 52. We were supposed to have dinner that night. She looked at her hands. I've been on this ride for 3 years since he passed. But this is the first year She stopped. I almost didn't come. I almost stayed home. I thought about it all the way up until the morning we left. I almost turned around twice on the highway. She looked up. And then we got stranded here. And I've been sitting in this garage for 6 hours watching you. She paused. I don't know how to say this right, but I think I needed to see this, whatever this is, what you did tonight. She shook her head slightly. I've been so angry for 3 years, at the parking lot, at the Wednesday, at the ordinariness of it, the way you said. In watching you tonight, you weren't angry. You were just working, just doing what needed doing, like you'd made some kind of peace with it. Elijah looked at her for a long time. I haven't made peace with it, he said. I don't think you make peace with it. I think you just find something to do with your hands. So the grief has somewhere to go besides just straight through you. He looked at the workbench, at the tools, at Daniel's coffee mug. My son loved motorcycles, so I keep fixing motorcycles. That's the only logic I've got. Carla was quiet. Then, that's enough logic, she said quietly. He nodded. She turned to leave, then stopped, turned back. My dad would have wanted me to tell you that she struggled for a second, then found it. You're the real deal. He had a thing he said about people. He'd say, that one's the real deal. He said it about maybe 4 people in his whole life. She looked straight at Elijah. You're number 5. She walked back to the group. Elijah stood at his workbench and looked at Daniel's coffee mug for a moment. Then he heard boots approaching. One person, deliberate. He knew before he turned. William. The quiet man had his helmet under his left arm, and in his right hand he held a business card. He held it out without preamble, without a speech, without the kind of setup that people gave when they wanted credit for what they were about to do. Just the card. Elijah took it. He didn't look at it yet. He looked at William. You want to tell me something, Elijah said. William looked at him with those eyes that had been watching for the last 6 hours. Not right now, he said. There's a time for things, and right now isn't it? But there is a time. Yes. That's cryptic, Elijah said. William almost smiled. It's honest. They looked at each other. You fixed 10 motorcycles tonight, William said. In a garage with failing electricity in the middle of a historic storm with materials and tools that most shops would consider inadequate. You fed strangers. You refused money 3 times that I saw." He paused. "And you never once looked like you thought any of that was remarkable." "It wasn't remarkable," Elijah said. "It needed doing." "That," William said quietly, "is exactly what I mean." He put out his hand. Elijah shook it. William put on his helmet, walked to his motorcycle, a bike. Elijah now realized he'd never actually seen up close because it had been parked at the edge of the lot the entire night, and William M. had arrived on foot, and he started it. The sound was extraordinary. Not loud, precise, clean in a way that spoke of engineering Elijah associated with a price tag he didn't think about because it was outside the universe of things he thought about. He watched the bike pull out. Becky was beside him. "You know who that was?" she asked. He said his name was William. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "He doesn't usually ride with groups," she said slowly. "He joined this year's ride 2 days ago, just showed up at the starting point, asked if he could join. We don't turn anyone away." "That's good policy," Elijah said. "Elijah." She said his name with a specific weight. "Did you look at the card?" He looked down at his hand. He'd been holding the card the whole time. He looked at it. William Carter. He read the name. Carter Motors International. He read the title. Founder and chairman. He read it again. Carter Motors International was not a name that needed explaining in the motorcycle world. It was the kind of name that didn't need explaining in almost any world. A company that had started in a garage in Tennessee in 1971 and had become one of the largest motorcycle manufacturers on the continent. A legacy brand. A name that people in this industry said with a particular kind of weight. Elijah stared at the card. He thought about the quality of the bike William had ridden out on. He thought about the eyes, the watching, the specific technical, methodical watching. He thought about the handshake. Becky watched his face as he processed all of this. "He's going to call you," she said. She didn't sound certain. She sounded like she was telling him something she believed. "Rich men forget," Elijah said. "Not bitterly, just factually, the way you state weather. They mean to do things and then their lives happen and they forget." "Maybe," Becky said. Then, but I've been running this ride for 12 years and I've never seen that man watch anyway the way he watched you tonight. And I've never seen him shake someone's hand the way he just shook yours." She looked down the highway where the last of the convoy was beginning to move. "I think he saw something tonight that he's been looking for a long time." Elijah looked at the business card once more. Then he put it in his shirt pocket, right next to the eviction notice. The 2 pieces of paper sat against his chest, side by side, as the last motorcycle rolled out of his lot and onto Highway 61 and disappeared south into the early morning light. He stood in the empty lot for a long moment. A 70-year-old man, alone, standing on gravel, with a leaking roof behind him and $12 in his wallet and an eviction notice against his heart and a business card from a man who was probably already 50 miles down the road and already thinking about other things. He was very tired. He was more awake than he'd been in years. He went back inside, sat on his stool, put his hands flat on the workbench the way he always did, the way he'd done the night Daniel died, the way he did when he needed to stay connected to something solid. He looked at Daniel's coffee mug. He looked at the photographs on the walls. He looked at the 6 motorcycles that had been dead 8 hours ago and were now running clean. Outside Highway 61 was quiet. The eviction notice was due in 72 hours. William Carter's card sat in his pocket. The clock on the wall clicked. 6:15 in the morning. Elijah Brooks sat in his garage completely alone and did what he had always done when the world gave him something he didn't know how to hold. He waited, and he kept his hands on the workbench, and he did not look away. The first day after was the hardest, not because anything bad happened, because nothing happened at all. Elijah slept 4 hours on the cot he kept in the back room, the one Margaret had told him for 20 years to throw away because it was uncomfortable, and he'd kept it for 20 years because it was there and he was practical, and the discomfort reminded him to get up and get back to work. He woke at 10 in the morning to a garage that was absolutely completely quiet, and for exactly 3 seconds before his brain fully assembled itself, he thought he heard motorcycles. Then he was awake all the way, and the garage was just the garage, and there were empty coffee cups on the workbench and the smell of soup still hanging in the air, and 6 parking spaces where 6 broken motorcycles had been, and now there was nothing in those spaces at all. He sat up, put his feet on the floor, put his hands on his knees. The eviction notice was still in his shirt pocket, which was hanging on the hook by the cot. William Carter's business card was in the same pocket. He could see them from where he sat, two rectangles of paper that represented two completely different possible futures, and neither of them was resolved, and both of them were waiting on other people to make decisions that Elijah Brooks had no control over whatsoever. He was not a man who handled that well. He stood up, washed his hands and face at the utility sink, made coffee on the hot plate, stood at the workbench with his mug. Not Daniel's, he never used Daniel's, and looked at the wall of photographs and drank his coffee and thought about the 72 hours remaining before the bank made a decision that 42 years of work couldn't reverse. He did not look at William Carter's card. Not yet. He had work to do. A customer had dropped off a 2003 Kawasaki Vulcan 3 days ago with a transmission problem that Elijah had diagnosed, but not yet started on because the parts had only arrived the day before the storm. He pulled the parts box off the shelf, set them on the workbench, put on his glasses, got to work. This was what he did with waiting. He already knew it. He'd learned it the hard way through every hard thing his life had handed him. You did not sit with waiting. You gave your hands something to do, and you let your mind run whatever loops it needed to run while your hands took care of business. It was the only way he knew how to survive time that he couldn't control. He worked on the Kawasaki for 3 hours. The phone did not ring. He told himself he wasn't listening for it. He was absolutely listening for it. By 2 in the afternoon, he had the transmission issue resolved and was doing a secondary check on the brake system when he heard tires on gravel and looked up to see a white pickup truck pulling into his lot. He didn't recognize it. He watched the door open and watched a man get out, mid-40s, button-down shirt, the specific kind of clean shoes that said office rather than garage, and walked toward the door with a clipboard. Elijah knew what a clipboard meant before the man opened his mouth. Mr. Brooks. The man had the voice of someone who delivered bad news professionally and had learned to do it without effect. My name is Gary Stills. I'm with Suncoast Property Holdings. I'm here regarding the notice of... I know what the notice is, Elijah said. I've had it in my pocket for 11 days. Gary Stills stopped, adjusted his grip on the clipboard. Yes, sir, I understand. I just need to... I'm required to do a walkthrough assessment of the property prior to what? Prior to the transition proceedings. Elijah looked at him. Transition, he said. Yes, sir. You mean before you take it? Gary Stills had the decency to look uncomfortable. Mr. Brooks, I want you to know that the company is prepared to offer you an extended timeline for removal of personal property. We understand you have been here a long time and 42 years, Elijah said. Yes, sir. This workbench, I built it 1989. My son helped me. He was 8 years old. He held the boards while I ran the screws. Gary Stills looked at the workbench, looked back at Elijah. Something moved through his face, something human, something that his professional training was trying to smooth back down. I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks. I genuinely am. But the debt amount, I know the debt amount. Then you understand that without... I understand everything, Elijah said. His voice was not raised. It was very level. You do what you need to do, walk your walk through, write your numbers down, but I'm going to ask you one thing. He looked at the man directly. Don't touch anything while you're in here. Don't move anything. Don't pick anything up. You look with your eyes, you write with your pen, and you leave the way you came in. Gary Stills nodded quickly. Of course, absolutely. He did his walkthrough. Elijah watched him from the workbench, not following him, not hovering, just watching. The man was thorough. He measured things. He photographed things. He made notes on his clipboard with a mechanical pencil that clicked every time he extended the lead. The sound of that clicking made Elijah's jaw tighten in a way he made sure didn't show on his face. When Gary Stills reached the wall of photographs, he slowed down. He stood there longer than he needed to for an assessment. He looked at the faces, the bikes, the years. Then he turned around and walked back to Elijah, and he said very quietly, off script, off clipboard, in his actual human voice rather than his professional one. My uncle had a shop, 40 years, lost it in 2008, never recovered. He looked at Elijah. I'm sorry, this is my job today. Elijah looked at him for a moment. Did your uncle find something else? Gary blinked. He started teaching at a community college Auto shop class. That's good, Elijah said. That's not nothing. Gary Stills nodded slowly. No, he said. It wasn't nothing. He gathered himself back into his professional posture. I'll file this today. You have 72 hours from the original notice, which means Friday morning, and Elijah said, yes, sir, Friday morning. He left. Elijah listened to the white pickup back out of the gravel lot and pull onto Highway 61 and drive away until he couldn't hear it anymore. Then he picked up his coffee mug and found it empty and put it back down. He looked at his phone. Nothing. He went back to work. The second day was worse than the first because it had a different quality of silence. The first day, the silence was just quiet. The second day, it was loud. It pressed on him. It had opinions. He moved the Kawasaki back to its waiting bay and pulled out a 1978 Triumph Bonneville that belonged to a retired school teacher named Mr. Petty, who was the most patient customer Elijah had ever had, a man who dropped his bike off and never once called to ask about it because he said he trusted Elijah absolutely, and time was something he had plenty of. He worked on the Triumph. He did not look at the phone. He looked at the phone 11 times in the first hour. By the third time he caught himself doing it, he put the phone face down on the workbench under a rag so he couldn't see the screen. Then he realized that was foolish because he'd still hear it if it rang. Then he took the rag off the phone and left it face up where he could see it. Then he decided the whole exercise was beneath him and he was not going to think about the phone anymore. He thought about the phone constantly. He thought about William Carter. He thought about those eyes, that watching, that deliberate, technical, thorough watching that had lasted 6 hours without interruption. He thought about the handshake, the specific quality of the handshake, the way it was direct without being performative, the way it communicated something without saying it. He'd shaken hands with thousands of men over 70 years, and he knew the difference between a handshake that meant something and a handshake that was just a handshake. But rich men were different. He knew that too. He'd had exactly 3 rich men come through this garage in 42 years, and all 3 of them had said things they meant in the moment and then meant less as the moment receded. Not because they were bad men, because their lives were large and crowded and full of things competing for their attention, and a mechanic in a leaking garage in Clarksdale, Mississippi was not necessarily going to win that competition against everything else a man like William Carter had filling up his days. He worked on the Triumph. The clock clicked through the afternoon. At 4:47, the phone rang. He knew it had rung because the sound of it stopped all movement in his body, all thought, all background noise, and the garage went so quiet he could hear the fluorescent light above his head buzzing. He stood very still for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to decide something about himself, long enough to decide that whatever this was, he was going to answer it the way he answered everything, straight on. He picked up the phone. Brooks Motorcycle Repair. A pause. Just a half a second. Then, Mr. Brooks, this is William Carter. The voice was the same. Quiet, deliberate. The voice of a man who had learned that he didn't need to be loud because the room came to him. Elijah sat down on a stool. Mr. Carter, he said, I told you my name was William. You did. I'd like you to use it. All right, William. Another pause, not uncomfortable. The kind of pause a careful man used to make sure he started with the right words. I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it before you respond. Can you do that? I can do that, Elijah said. I have been in the motorcycle industry for 47 years, William said. I started in a garage in Knoxville when I was 23 years old with $4,000 and a 1965 Triumph that needed a complete rebuild. I have been to every major motorcycle show, every major race, every manufacturing facility on this continent, and several abroad. I have met engineers with doctorates. I have hired master mechanics from Japan, from Germany, from Italy. I have sat on panels with people who have forgotten more about internal combustion than most people ever learn. He paused. Are you following me? I'm following you, Elijah said. 2 nights ago, William said, I watched you rebuild a flooded ignition module without a diagnostic meter using a technique I have never seen in 47 years. I watched you diagnose a fuel delivery problem by sound alone correctly in under 90 seconds. I watched you work on 10 different motorcycles across 4 different brands in 6 different model years without once referring to a manual, without once hesitating over a process and without making a single error that I could detect. Another pause, shorter this time, more direct. You may be the most talented mechanic I have ever met in my life. The garage was very quiet. Elijah's hand was steady on the phone. His face was still. But something in his chest was doing something he couldn't quite name and didn't try to. He started. I asked you to hear me first, William said. Elijah stopped. I'm not calling to flatter you, William said. I'm calling because I have a proposition, and I want you to understand that it comes from a business position as much as a personal one, because I think you're the kind of man who would trust it more if I said that plainly. A beat. Carter Motors is launching an initiative. We're calling it the American Craft Project. The goal is to document, preserve, and teach traditional mechanical techniques, the kind of techniques that aren't in any manual, that aren't being passed down in any trade school, that are being lost because the people who carry them are getting older and nobody is learning from them before they're gone. He paused. I want you to be part of that project. Specifically, I want you to lead it. Elijah sat on his stool. He looked at Daniel's coffee mug. He looked at the eviction notice in his shirt pocket, which he'd moved back there this morning out of habit, or out of something that wasn't quite habit and wasn't quite superstition, but lived in the neighborhood of both. William, he said, I appreciate what you're saying. I want you to know that. But I'm going to be straight with you because that's the only way I know how to be. I've got a bank that's taking this building on Friday morning. I've got $11 in my wallet, and I've got 42 years of work inside these four walls that I am not in a position to simply pick up and move somewhere else at 70 years old. He stopped. Let that sit. So whatever you're proposing, I need you to understand what you're proposing it to. A silence on the line. Then William Carter said something that Elijah had not expected. I know about the eviction notice. The temperature in the garage seemed to change. Elijah sat very still. How? Becky Lawson told me. She looked into it. She felt responsible. She wanted to help. A pause. I want you to know I didn't go looking for that information. She brought it to me this morning. Elijah absorbed this. He thought about Becky, her steady eyes, the way she held that envelope of money, the way she'd said Marcus's name. He thought about what it meant that she'd made a phone call on his behalf to a man she'd met 2 days ago and what that said about who she was. All right, he said carefully. So you know. Yes. And, William took a breath, and I've already spoken to my legal team. The debt has been addressed. The eviction proceeding has been halted. The property, your garage, the building your father helped you build is no longer at risk. The clock on the wall clicked. Elijah heard it click. He did not say anything for what was probably 15 seconds, which felt like something much longer and much heavier than 15 seconds. Say that again, he said. His voice was completely level. It was level the way a surface is level when everything underneath it is working very hard. The building is yours, William said. Clear, no debt, no conditions attached to that part. That's done regardless of anything else I'm about to say, because a man's life work belongs to him, and I will not sit on that. Elijah put his free hand flat on the workbench. Daniel's workbench. 8-year-old Daniel holding the boards while his father ran the screws. You can't do that, Elijah said. It's done, William said. William. Elijah's voice had something in it now. Something that was working very hard to stay in its lane. That's $4,300. You don't just do that for a man you met 2 days ago. With respect, William said quietly, yes, I do, when the man is who you are. A pause. Can I tell you the rest now? Elijah's hand was still flat on the workbench. He could feel the grain of the wood under his palm. He pressed down slightly, the way you press down on something to confirm it's real. Go ahead, he said. The American Craft Project needs a home, William said. A real one, not a corporate facility, not a showroom, a working garage. The kind that has 42 years of real work soaked into the walls. He paused. I'd like that home to be Brooks Motorcycle Repair. I'd like to fund a complete renovation, new equipment, proper training, base space for students. We'd bring in young mechanics, veterans, people who can't afford trade school. We'd document your techniques, archive them, teach them. We'd build something that outlasts both of us. Another pause. the kind that meant the next thing was important. And I'd like to put a museum section in the building. American motorcycle history, real history, the kind that starts in garages like yours, not in corporate boardrooms like mine. Elijah was looking at the wall of photographs. Thousands of customers, 42 years of faces, every single person who had ever trusted him with something they cared about. And the scholarship, he said, he didn't know where that came from. It just came out because something in everything William had described had pointed straight at it, and his mind had followed the point without asking permission. William was quiet for a second. "Tell me what you're thinking." "Daniel," Elijah said, "my son, he didn't get to finish things. He had so much that he didn't get to do. And there are young people right now in this county, in counties like this one, all over this country who want to work with their hands, who have the ability, who have the drive, and they cannot afford the door to get in." He stopped, steadied himself. "If you're building something in this garage, if you're putting Daniel's father's name on it, then Daniel's name goes on a scholarship. Young people who can't afford trade school get a chance. That's the only condition I have." Silence on the line, not an empty silence, a full one. Then William Carter said, "Done." Just that, one word, no hesitation, no qualifications, no, "we'll look into it," or "let me run that by someone," or "I think we can work with that." Just done the way a man said it when he'd already decided and was just waiting for the right thing to say it to. Elijah looked at Daniel's coffee mug. He thought about the last time Daniel had held it. The last morning Daniel had sat on that stool and talked about his cross-country route, pointing at the imaginary map in the air with his finger like he was already tracing the highway, already feeling the road. The specific sound of his laugh, the way he'd said, "Pop, it's going to be legendary." And Elijah had said, "Long as you call me every night." And Daniel had said, "Every night, I promise." And then he'd never gotten to make those calls because there had been a Tuesday in February and a red light that someone hadn't respected, and now the promise lived in this garage and always would. "Elijah," William's voice. "Careful. You still with me?" "I'm here," Elijah said. His voice came out rougher than he'd intended. He cleared his throat. "I'm here." "I need to ask you something directly," William said. "Ask it." "Why did you open the door?" William said. "That night. You had every reason not to. The bank was taking your building. You had nothing to spare. 120 strangers. Why?" Elijah was quiet for a moment. "Because they were in the rain," he said. "That's it. That's it." Another silence. Then William said very quietly, "I've been looking for that answer for 47 years. A pause. "I built a company. I built it, right? I think I'm proud of it. But somewhere along the way, the company got bigger than the reason I started it. I started it because I loved machines and I loved the people who rode them, and I wanted to build things worth building. And then it got big and the meetings got long and the numbers got large and He stopped, seemed to collect something. "I got on that ride 2 days ago because I needed to remember what it felt like before all of that, before the company was Carter Motors International, when it was just me in a garage in Knoxville." He paused. "And then I ended up in your garage, and I watched you work, and I watched you be exactly the thing I was trying to remember." The line was quiet. "William," Elijah said, "Yeah. You sure about all of this? Not the money, not the renovation. I mean, are you sure about what you're doing here?" A beat. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm 70 years old. I'm a black mechanic in Clarksdale, Mississippi. I didn't go to school for this. I don't have certificates. I don't have credentials. I have that wall of photographs and 42 years of showing up every morning." He paused. "Are you sure that's the face you want on something called the American Craft Project?" William Carter didn't answer immediately, and the pause was not uncertainty. It was the pause of a man who wanted to make sure that what he said next came out exactly the way he meant it. "Elijah," he said, "that is precisely the face I want." The clock on the wall clicked. Elijah Brooks sat on his stool in his garage in Clarksdale, Mississippi, with the eviction notice in his pocket that wasn't an eviction notice anymore, and his son's coffee mug on the bench in front of him, and 42 years of his life on the walls around him, and a phone against his ear carrying the voice of a man who had sat in this garage in the dark, in the rain, and watched him work, and decided that what he saw was worth preserving. He was not a man who cried. He didn't cry now. But he put his free hand over his mouth for just a moment, just a second, and he pressed it there, and he breathed through his nose, and he let the feeling move through him without trying to manage it or name it or put it anywhere. Then he took his hand away. "When do we start?" he asked. And William Carter, billionaire, founder and chairman of Carter Motors International, one of the most powerful men in the American motorcycle industry, said, "Monday morning, if that works for you." "Monday morning works for me," Elijah said. He hung up the phone. He sat for a long moment. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the eviction notice, unfolded it one last time, read it one last time, all the way through, every word, every clause, every cold legal phrase that had been pressing against his chest for 11 days. He set it on the workbench. He picked up the rag from his left shoulder, the one that was always over the left shoulder, the 42-year habit, and he laid it over the eviction notice, slowly, deliberately, the way you cover something that is finished. He stood up, walked to the wall of photographs, found the one he was looking for. He always knew where it was without looking. A photograph from 12 years ago, Daniel, 22, standing next to a fully restored 1967 Harley-Davidson Electra Glide that the two of them had spent 4 months rebuilding together. Daniel's arm was thrown around Elijah's shoulders, and he was grinning the way only 22-year-olds could grin, like the whole world was something to be genuinely delighted by. Elijah put 2 fingers on his son's face in the photograph. He stood there for a moment. "Daniel," he said quietly, "your name's going on something." The garage held that sentence. Outside on Highway 61, a single motorcycle went past, going fast, going somewhere. Elijah watched the sound of it fade south. Then he turned around, picked up his wrench, and went back to work on Mr. Petty's Triumph Bonneville, because there was still work to be done, and the work was how he honored everything that had gotten him here and everything that was coming next. The clock on the wall clicked. 4:58 in the afternoon. 66 hours until Friday morning that no longer meant what it had meant yesterday. And everything, absolutely everything, was as different now. Monday came the way important days always came, exactly like every other day until it didn't. Elijah was up at 5. Coffee made, workbench wiped down, tools arranged. He'd done this same sequence every morning for 42 years, and he wasn't going to change it because a billionaire was coming. He put on his work shirt, the dark green one, the one with Brooks Motorcycle Repair stitched in yellow over the left pocket. The letters slightly faded now from a few hundred washes, and he buttoned it from the bottom, up the way his father had taught him, and he stood at his workbench and drank his coffee and waited. He was not nervous. He told himself he was not nervous. His coffee mug shook slightly when he set it down. He was a little nervous. At 7:58, 2 minutes before 8, he heard vehicles on the highway. Not motorcycles this time. A truck. Then another truck. Then a vehicle he couldn't immediately identify by sound, which was unusual because Elijah could identify almost anything by sound. He walked to the garage door and looked out, and what he saw made him go still in a way that was different from his normal stillness. 3 vehicles. A pickup truck pulling a covered trailer, a black SUV, and a car he now recognized as the specific, quiet, engineered kind that William Carter apparently drove when he wasn't on a motorcycle. They pulled into the lot in a clean line, no wasted motion, and doors opened, and people got out, and William Carter was the first one through the garage door. He was dressed the way Elijah was dressed. Work clothes. Not expensive work clothes, actual work clothes with actual wear on them. He put his hand out, and Elijah shook it, and William looked around the garage with the specific, focused attention of a man doing an assessment he'd already started 2 nights ago in the dark. "Same as I remembered," William said. "It's the same," Elijah agreed. "Good." He turned. "I want you to meet some people." He gestured toward the door, and 3 people came in. A woman in her early 40s, tall with a project manager's posture, the kind that meant she tracked 12 things simultaneously and forgot none of them. A younger man, mid-20s, carrying a large notebook and looking at the walls with an expression that was somewhere between awe and academic intensity. And a man about Elijah's age, maybe 2 years older, with the hands of someone who'd spent 60 years working with them, and the eyes of someone who wanted to be told what to do so he could start. "This is Sandra Reeves," William said, indicating the woman. "She runs project operations for the American Craft Project. She will be your main point of contact for everything logistical. Whatever you need, you tell Sandra." He said this like a fact and not a promise, which Elijah noted. This is Marcus Webb, he indicated the young man with the notebook. He's documenting the project. He's also a mechanical engineering PhD candidate at Vanderbilt who specifically requested this assignment, so he's not just a note-taker. He understands what he's looking at. He turned to the older man. And this is Lou Garrett. Lou has been with Carter Motors for 31 years. He was our head of restoration for 20 of those years. He paused. Lou asked to be here personally. I didn't assign him. Lou Garrett put his hand out to Elijah. His grip was the grip of a man who'd spent 3 decades working on engines. I watched William's footage from that night, he said directly, no preamble. He recorded some of it on his phone, the technique you used on the ignition module. He shook his head once. I've been in this business 31 years. I have never seen that done that way. I came here to learn it, if you'll teach me. Elijah looked at him, looked at the hand he was still holding. 31 years, he said. You're not too old to learn something new. Lou Garrett smiled. It was the smile of a man who'd been asked that question before and liked it every time. Sir, he said, I hope I never get that old. Elijah let go of his hand. Get your notebook, he told Marcus Webb. We start this morning. Marcus Webb's pen was out before Elijah finished the sentence. Sandra Reeves had her phone to her ear. And William Carter stood in the corner of Brooks Motorcycle Repair with his arms crossed and the expression of a man watching something he'd been trying to make happen for a very long time, finally beginning to happen. The morning moved fast, faster than Elijah expected. He'd anticipated something more formal, introductions, paperwork, a meeting around a table somewhere. What he got instead was work immediate and real and grounded, which was the right thing and the thing he would have chosen if he'd been the one choosing. He started with the technique Lou had mentioned, the ignition module work. He pulled the Kawasaki Vulcan fully repaired now waiting for its owner, and he began explaining what he did and why walking through it step by step in the way he'd never actually had to articulate before. Because he'd never had to teach it, he'd just done it, and doing and teaching turned out to be very different skills. Walk us through your diagnostic sequence, Marcus Webb said, pen moving fast. Before you touch anything. I said, what are you actually doing? Elijah thought about it. Listening, he said, to the engine, to everything. The engine, the way it stopped, the sound it made when it stopped, whether it stopped all at once or wound down, whether there was a smell, whether the rider reported a feeling before it stopped, a vibration, a hesitation, a change in responsiveness. He paused. Most mechanics run straight to the machine when something goes wrong. I run to the moment before it went wrong because the machine is telling you about the moment, not the other way around. Marcus Webb wrote that down and underlined it twice. Lou Garrett was leaning forward with the intensity of a man who had just heard something click into place that had been slightly misaligned for years. The moment before, he said half to himself. The machine doesn't lie, Elijah said. People think machines break randomly. They don't. They give you signals. Sometimes the signals are quiet. You have to be quiet enough to hear them. How did you learn that? Marcus asked. By missing it, Elijah said simply. Early on, I missed signals on 3 or 4 bikes that I should have caught. Not catastrophically, nobody got hurt, but I missed them. And after the 3rd time, I swore I wouldn't miss it again. And I figured out that the reason I was missing it was because I was rushing in with my hands before I finished listening with my ears. He put his hand on the Kawasaki. Every machine has a voice. This is a fact, not a philosophy, a technical fact. Learn the voice and you learn the machine. The garage was completely silent except for Marcus's pen. Lou Garrett slowly nodded the nod of a man updating something deep and fundamental. Sandra Reeves, who Elijah had assumed was on her phone handling logistics, was not on her phone. She was standing very still near the workbench listening. She noticed him notice her and she said without embarrassment, I'm sorry, I know this is the technical session, but I want to understand what we're building before I start building it. That's the right instinct, Elijah said. She straightened slightly like a student who'd just been told they got the answer right by a teacher whose opinion mattered to them. William stayed in his corner and said almost nothing and watched everything. By noon, they had documented 3 complete techniques. Marcus Webb had filled 40 pages of his notebook. Lou Garrett had pulled out his own notebook at some point, a battered thing spiral-bound that had the look of a book that had been through years of garage work and was making his own parallel notes in a handwriting that was small and precise and clearly practiced. The two of them had started completing each other's shorthand without realizing they'd developed shorthand, which was the sign of two people moving toward the same understanding from different directions. Sandra appeared at Elijah's elbow at 12:15 with a question she delivered quietly and directly. The renovation scope. William asked me to ask you what you want, not what we think makes sense, what you want. Elijah looked at her. The bones of this building stay. Meaning, the workbench, the pegboards, the photograph wall, the layout of the main bay. The bones stay exactly as they are. He paused. Everything else, the roof, the electrical, the heaters, the equipment that gets done right. But I am not interested in walking into a different building with my name on it. I'm interested in walking into this building working properly. Sandra was typing into her phone as he spoke. The photograph wall, she said. How do we handle that during renovation? You don't touch it, he said. You work around it. Every single photograph stays exactly where it is. She looked up from her phone, looked at the wall, looked back at him. Done, she said, and typed something else. And he was fairly certain that whatever she just typed meant that this was now a formal requirement that would be communicated to every contractor who came near this building. He appreciated that. At 12:30, Roy called. Elijah almost didn't recognize the number. Then he did. He'd given Roy his card, an old card, the ones he'd had printed in 2019, with a slightly wrong phone number that he'd corrected in pen on every single card on the night of the storm when Roy had asked for it at the end of their side-by-side hours of work. He answered. Roy, Elijah. The big man's voice was different over the phone, still large, still present, but stripped of the physical bulk that had filled the garage. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with him. That's the only way I know how to be. Is what Becky's telling us real about the project about Carter Motors? Elijah looked across the garage at William, who was currently crouched next to Lou Garrett, looking at something in the notebook, their heads bent together over the page. It's real, he said. A pause on Roy's end, long enough to mean something. I told my daughter about that night, Roy said. She's 24. She wants to be a mechanic. Has wanted it since she was 12. Can't afford the school. He stopped, started again. I've been killing myself trying to figure out how to get her there. Elijah was quiet. The scholarship, Roy said. Becky said there's going to be a scholarship. Daniel Brooks Memorial Scholarship, Elijah said. It's being established, yes. Another pause. Then Roy said very quietly in a voice that had no performance in it at all. Her name is Josephine, Jo. She can take apart an engine and put it back together. She learned from watching videos on her phone because we couldn't afford classes. She's been doing it in our garage on a 2002 Honda Shadow I bought her for $400. He stopped. She's better at it than I was at her age. She's probably better at it than I am now. Roy, Elijah said, yeah. Tell Josephine to send in an application. Her name will be on the list. The line was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then Roy said, I don't know how to. You don't have to, Elijah said. Tell her to send the application. Roy made a sound that was not quite a word. Then he cleared his throat and said, yes. Okay, I will. Then, you know what you are, Elijah Brooks. A mechanic, Elijah said. Roy laughed, short and real. Among other things. He hung up. Elijah put the phone down. Marcus Webb was watching him from across the workbench with the expression of someone who had just witnessed something he was not sure how to categorize. Write that down too, Elijah said. Which part? All of it. The way knowledge gets passed on. It's not always in a classroom. Sometimes it's a father watching his daughter learn from videos on a phone because nobody opened a door for her yet. He picked up his wrench. That's what this project is about. Opening doors. Marcus wrote that down, underlined it 3 times. The afternoon brought the first real complication, which Elijah had been waiting for because nothing real happened without complications, and the absence of them just meant you hadn't found them yet. Sandra came to him at 2 o'clock with her phone in her hand and a look on her face that was professionally neutral in the way faces got when they were containing something that wanted out. There's a reporter, she said. Local, Clarksdale Courier. They heard something about Carter Motors, about you, about the night of the storm. She paused. She's asking for a statement. Elijah set down his wrench. From who? From you and from William. He looked over at William, who had apparently already been briefed because he was walking toward them from across the garage with the calm expression of a man who dealt with press for 40 years and had opinions about it. Your call, William said to Elijah when he reached them. This is your garage, your story. You decide how much of it gets told and when. Elijah thought about that. What's her name? Sandra checked her phone. Diane Marsh. She's been at the Courier for 15 years. Is she good? Sandra looked slightly surprised by the question. Yes, actually. She's the one who broke the story on the Sunflower County school funding issue 3 years ago. She's a real reporter. Then call her back, Elijah said. Invite her in, but I want to talk to her myself first. Without a camera, just talking. William nodded slowly, once. The nod of a man who respected the decision without needing to add anything to it. Diane Marsh arrived at 2:45, and she was not what Elijah expected, which was a lesson he'd learned and relearned and kept having to relearn. People were almost never what you expected. She was 50-something, small, with short gray hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the bearing of someone who had been taking notes on the world for a very long time and was still interested in what it had to say. She shook Elijah's hand and looked him in the eye and said, I want to be straight with you. I'm here because I got a tip from someone who was on that ride. I'm not here to write a puff piece about a big company coming to town. I'm here because I think there's a real story about a real person, and I'd rather tell it right than not tell it at all. Elijah looked at her. Who tipped you? She smiled slightly. 74-year-old Vietnam vet, name of Harold, said I had to talk to the man who fixed his kill switch. Despite everything, despite the complicated weight of the day, Elijah laughed. A real laugh, short and genuine, the kind that came out of nowhere and meant exactly what it sounded like. Harold, he said. He called me at 8 this morning, and Diane said. He was very insistent. That tracks, Elijah said. They sat at the workbench, not in chairs brought in from somewhere else, not at a table set up for the purpose at the workbench, on the stools, the way Elijah sat when he talked to customers or worked through problems. Because this was his workbench and his garage, and that was the right way to do it. She asked good questions, the kind that showed she'd thought before she came. She asked about 42 years, not just 2 nights ago. She asked about Daniel carefully, with the specific care of a journalist who understood that some subjects had to be approached correctly or not at all. She asked about the eviction notice. She already knew about it, which meant Harold had been thorough, and she asked what it felt like to have it resolved the way it was resolved. Strange, Elijah said honestly. I'm still working out what to do with it. What do you mean? I mean, I spent 11 days making peace with losing this place. I was getting there. I was doing the work of it. You know how you do the work of accepting something that's coming. I was doing that. And then in 48 hours, it reversed completely. He looked at the workbench. The mind doesn't just flip back over like a pancake. It takes time to catch up. Diane Marsh wrote that down, looked up. But you're not unhappy. No, he said. I am not unhappy. What are you, He thought about it. Responsible, he said finally. That's the word. I feel responsible. William Carter is putting real resources behind this. Becky Lawson and those 120 people spent a night in my garage and then carried this story to people who could help. Roy's daughter might get a scholarship because of a night that started as a storm nobody wanted. He paused. That's a weight, a good weight, but weight is weight. You feel it. Diane Marsh looked at him for a moment. Then she said, Can I ask you something off the record? Go ahead. Do you think you deserve this? Everything that's happening. The garage was quiet. Elijah looked at the wall of photographs, at 42 years of faces, at the photograph of Daniel, 22 years old, grinning with his arm around his father's shoulders. I think Daniel deserved to take his ride, he said. I think Margaret deserved more years. I think the families of every name on Becky's memorial list deserve to have those people come home. He paused. Deserve is a complicated word. The world doesn't run on deserve. He looked back at Diane. But I'll tell you what I believe. I believe that if you do the work every day without asking what you're going to get for it, I believe that eventually the work speaks. Maybe not to everyone. Maybe not in a way you recognize when it's happening. But eventually it speaks. He put his hand flat on the workbench. This workbench is what happens when the work speaks. Diane Marsh was not writing. She was looking at him the way people looked at things they wanted to keep. Then she clicked her pen. "Thank you," she said. "I'm going to tell this story the right way." "I know you are," he said, and he meant it. The article ran the next morning, not in just the Clarksdale Courier. Diane Marsh had a contact at the Associated Press, 15 years of real journalism, built relationships that crossed lines, and the AP picked it up by noon. By evening, it was on 3 national news sites. By the following morning, it was somewhere else entirely, in a territory that Elijah had no map for and no experience with. His phone started ringing at 7 a.m. and did not stop. He let most of the calls go. Sandra fielded them. She had apparently been prepared for this in a way that suggested William had anticipated it, which Elijah filed away as evidence that the man thought ahead in ways that weren't immediately visible. But 3 calls he took himself. The first was Becky. "Have you seen it?" she said immediately when he picked up. No greeting, the tone of a woman who was emotional and trying to manage it through momentum. "I've seen it," he said. "Elijah." She stopped. Tried again. "Elijah, the comment section. I know you probably don't read comment sections. I don't. But people are. What's happening online is," she stopped again. And then she did something he'd heard her do exactly once before at 5:47 in the morning, when she'd had to turn her face away to keep it together. She went quiet for a moment. Then, "There are veterans posting from all over the country, talking about their mechanics, talking about the people who kept their bikes running when everything else felt like it was falling apart, talking about what it means to have someone just show up, just be there, just fix the thing and not make it into a hole." She stopped, collected herself. The story got out, Elijah, the real story, not just the Carter Motors part, the human part. He was quiet. "Carla posted," Becky said, "my niece. She wrote about what you said to her, about finding something to do with your hands so the grief has somewhere to go." Her voice shifted slightly. "It's been shared 40,000 times. Elijah sat down on his stool. 40,000 times. He tried to hold that number and found he couldn't. It didn't fit in the same brain that had spent 42 years in this garage, that measured things in customers, in conversations, in the specific sound of an engine turning over after you'd brought it back from the edge. "Becky," he said. "Yeah. How's Harold?" She laughed. The surprised, real laugh of someone who hadn't expected the conversation to go that direction. "Harold is furious that he isn't getting more credit for starting all of this. He told me this morning that he considers himself the architect of the whole situation." "He's not wrong," Elijah said. "He is absolutely not wrong," she agreed. The second call was from a woman named Patricia Cole, who identified herself as the director of a veterans trade school in Jackson, Mississippi, 45 minutes south of Clarksdale. She was professional and direct and had clearly done her research before she called. She wanted to talk about a partnership with the American Craft Project, specifically about sending students to Brooks for hands-on instruction, and potentially about Elijah doing a seminar at her facility. He told her to call Sandra Reeves. He gave her Sandra's number. Then he said one thing. "Yes, the students you send, I don't care about their grades. I don't care about their test scores. I care about 2 things. Do they want to learn, and are they willing to be wrong?" Silence on her end. "Then that's my entire hiring philosophy for instructors." "Then we'll get along fine," he said and hung up. The third call came in at 3 in the afternoon, and it was the one he hadn't expected. An unfamiliar number, Mississippi area code, but not one he recognized. "Brooks Motorcycle Repair." A pause, a young voice, nervous, working hard to sound less nervous than it was. Is this Elijah Brooks?" "Speaking." "My name is James Whitfield. I'm 17. I live in Greenville. I read the article this morning." Another pause. "I want to be a mechanic. I've wanted to be a mechanic since I was 9 years old. My grandfather had a shop. He passed 2 years ago and The voice caught, slightly steadied, pushed through. "I've been working on bikes in my backyard, with YouTube videos. My mom can't afford, we can't." The boy stopped, reorganized, tried again. "I just wanted to call and say that what you did was, I don't have the right word for it, but it made me feel like maybe there's a place for someone like me in this world." A pause. "I'm sorry if this was a weird call." Elijah was looking at Daniel's coffee mug. He was thinking about a 22-year-old grinning in a photograph. He was thinking about Josephine Roy taking apart a Honda Shadow in her father's garage, learning from videos on a phone. He was thinking about what Carla had said, that she'd almost stayed home, that she'd almost turned around twice on the highway. "James," he said. "Yes, sir." "It's not a weird call." He picked up a pen. "Give me your address." "I what?" "Your address. I want to send you something." A longer pause. He could hear the boy trying to figure out if this was real. It's 4417 River Bend Road, Greenville, sir, but you don't have to." "I know, I don't have to," Elijah said. "Write down this phone number." He gave him Sandra's number. "Call that number tomorrow morning. Ask for Sandra Reeves. Tell her Elijah said you're on the list." Silence. "Mr. Brooks," James said, and his voice was not a 17-year-old's voice anymore. Not in the way he'd been performing it. It was just a kid's voice, unguarded and real. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Elijah said. "Just become good at it. That's all. Just become genuinely good at it." "I will," James said. "I promise." Elijah believed him. He hung up the phone and he sat for a moment, and he did the math, the informal, unmeasurable kind of math that wasn't about numbers. One night, one storm, one door opened because 120 people were in the rain. Becky, Marcus, Harold, Roy and Josephine, Carla and her ordinary Wednesday, Patricia Cole and her veterans and their trade school in Jackson, James Whitfield, 17 in Greenville, taking apart bikes in his backyard because his grandfather had loved them. All of it connected, all of it running back to the same moment. One man who said, "Everybody get inside before somebody gets hurt." William came to stand beside him at 4 o'clock as the day was winding down, and Sandra was gathering her things, and Marcus Webb was on his 4th notebook, and Lou Garrett was sitting in the corner making notes with the focused expression of a man who'd been handed something he wasn't going to waste. "You've had a day," William said. "I've had a day," Elijah agreed. "How are you holding up?" Elijah considered the question honestly. "I'm going to need about a week to understand what's happening," he said, "but I think I understand the direction." "What's the direction?" Elijah looked at the wall of photographs, at the years, at the faces, at Daniel. "Out," he said. "The work goes out, past these walls, past this county, past what I could do alone." He paused. "I spent 42 years doing it in here. Now it goes out." He turned to look at William directly. "That's what you saw that night, isn't it? That's what made you watch." William looked at him. "You saw something that should have been bigger than the building it was in," Elijah said. A silence. "Yes," William said quietly. "That's exactly what I saw." They stood there for a moment, 2 old men in a garage that smelled like oil and coffee, and 42 years of work standing in the specific silence that existed between people who had arrived at an understanding by different roads. Then Elijah picked up his wrench. "Tomorrow," he said, "I want to start on the electrical documentation. The techniques I use for troubleshooting ignition systems on bikes from the 70s and 80s. There are things I do that I've never seen anyone else do, and I need to get them out of my head and into a place where they don't disappear with me." William nodded. "And I want Lou in here early," Elijah said. "He's fast. He's going to get this." "Lou will be here at 7. "Good." Elijah turned back to the workbench, then without looking up, "William?" "Yeah. Thank you." He said it the way he said things that mattered, without excess, without performance. Just the words given their full weight and nothing added. William picked up his jacket. "Thank you," he said back, and he meant something by it that was longer than the word. He walked out. The garage settled into its evening quiet. Elijah worked until 7 on Mr. Petty's Triumph, which was coming along beautifully, which deserved the same care it had always deserved, regardless of everything else that was happening, because a man's bike was a man's bike, and it did not care about national news stories or American craft projects or what was or wasn't happening in Elijah Brooks' life. At 7, he covered the Triumph with a canvas cloth, wiped down the workbench, hung his rag over the left shoulder one more time, and then hung it on its hook. He stood in front of the photograph wall, found Daniel, 22 years old, the grin, the arm around his father's shoulders. "James Whitfield," he said quietly, 17 years old, Greenville, taking bikes apart in his backyard. He paused. "Roy's daughter, Josephine, learning from videos on her phone." He paused again. They're coming, Daniel. A whole lot of them are coming. He put two fingers on his son's face. This is going to be something. He turned off the light, walked out, locked the door behind him, the way he locked it every night, the same key, the same sequence, the same door that was his and always would be. Above Highway 61, the evening sky was the color it got in Mississippi in the late fall, deep and wide, and full of a kind of light that didn't apologize for being beautiful. Elijah stood in his gravel lot and looked at it for a moment. Then he got in his truck, and he drove home. 6 months moved away, real time moved when real work was happening, inside it fast and full, and leaving marks. The renovation took 11 weeks. Elijah had insisted on being present every single day, not to supervise, in the way people who didn't trust contractors supervised, but because this was his building, and he needed to watch it become what it was becoming so that his mind could keep up with the change. He needed to see every wall that came down and every wire that got replaced and every new piece of equipment that came through the door, because if he didn't see it happen in sequence, he was afraid he'd walk in one morning and not recognize the place, and that would break something in him that he couldn't afford to have broken. Sandra had understood this without being told. She'd structured the work so that the main bay, his bay, the workbench, the photograph wall, the stool with the cracked left leg was the last section touched. Everything around it changed first. New roof, new electrical, proper heating that didn't cough, 3 new training bays built into the expanded east side of the building, a documentation room for Marcus Webb and his notebooks, which now numbered 16, and were organized on a shelf in a way that made Elijah feel something he couldn't name, something about permanence, about the fact that what he knew would exist past him now, in a form that could be held and opened and read. And against the west wall, the museum section. William had brought in a curator, a woman named Helen Park from Nashville, who had spent 20 years at a music history museum and understood that objects carried stories the way people did, that the right context made the difference between a thing and a meaning. She had worked with Elijah for 3 weeks, going through the photographs, through the tools, through the records he'd kept in a series of composition notebooks dating back to 1983. Every customer, every hubbub, every bike. These notebooks, Helen had said on the third day holding the 1987 volume, with a care that Elijah appreciated because he'd never seen anyone else handle them with care, are a primary historical document. Do you understand that this is a record of American motorcycle culture in the rural South over 4 decades? This is irreplaceable. It's a job log, Elijah said. It is the history of how real people lived with their machines, Helen said firmly, and it is irreplaceable. He had let her photograph every page of every notebook. He had not realized until she said it out loud that what he'd been doing for 42 years was also without intending to keeping a record. He had thought he was just being organized. He had been organized and apparently without meaning to something more. The photograph wall stayed exactly as it was. Helen had mounted a small brass plate beside it that read 42 years of service, 1982 to 2024. Below that in smaller type, every face on this wall trusted this man with something they cared about. He never let a single one of them down. Elijah had read that plate when Helen showed it to him and had not said anything for a long moment. Then he'd said that last sentence. Yes, I can't verify that, he said. I can tell you I always tried. I can't tell you I never fell short. Helen had looked at him. Every person on that wall came back, she said. I checked. Sandra pulled the records, cross-referenced the notebooks. Every single customer who has an address we could locate has either returned themselves or referred someone else. She paused. I'd say that's verification. He had looked at the plate again. He had let it stand. The Brooks Motorcycle Restoration Center opened on a Saturday in April, and the weather did exactly what Mississippi weather did when it wanted to make a point. It was perfect, not just good, perfect. The kind of day that felt like it had been requested specifically and granted without conditions. Elijah was up at 4:30. He didn't sleep past 4:30 anymore. Hadn't since the night of the storm, which had rearranged his internal clock in some way he couldn't fully explain, and had stopped trying to. He made his coffee, put on his green work shirt, a new one, same design, same color, same yellow lettering. Sandra had found someone to make a dozen of them exactly right, and he buttoned it from the bottom up the way his father had taught him, and he drove to the garage before the sun was fully up. He needed to be there first. He needed 1 hour alone in it before anyone else arrived. He walked through the new main doors, same location as the old ones, same direction. They opened, he had been very specific about this, and he stood in his garage and looked at what it had become and what it had stayed. The workbench was there. His workbench. Daniel's workbench. The grain of the wood unchanged, the surface scarred and marked by 42 years of tools and oil, and worked the way a face was marked by the life it had lived honestly and without apology. The stool with the cracked left leg was there. Sandra had offered to replace it 4 times, and he had declined 4 times, and she had stopped offering, which was one of the many reasons he had come to trust her completely. Daniel's coffee mug was on the workbench where it always was. The photograph wall was unchanged. Every face, every bike, every year exactly as they had been arranged by the specific chaos of time and memory, and the fact that Elijah had always put photographs up when he had tape and a free hand, and never with any larger plan than that. The brass plate was beside it. He read it once, let it settle. He walked to the museum section. The 1967 Harley-Davidson Electra Glide was there, the bike he and Daniel had restored together, the one from the photograph on the wall, 12 years old and fully rebuilt, and gleaming in a way that said it had been loved. William had arranged to have it transported and installed as the centerpiece of the display, and when Elijah had first seen it in place, he had stood in front of it for a long time without speaking, and William had stood beside him without speaking, and that had been exactly right. Beside the bike framed was the photograph. Daniel at 22, the grin, the arm around his father's shoulders. Below it, on a small card in Helen's careful type, this motorcycle was restored by Elijah Brooks and his son Daniel Brooks, United States Marine Corps. Daniel passed away in February 2020 at age 29 before he could take his planned cross-country ride. This garage is in part his journey completed by other means. Elijah read it every time he walked past it. He read it now. He put 2 fingers on the photograph. The same 2 fingers, the same spot, the same way he'd been doing it for 6 months. A habit now, a ritual, the kind that didn't need explaining because it wasn't for anyone else. Today's the day, he said quietly. 2,000 people, they're saying, give or take. He paused. Your name's going on a scholarship. First class of recipients gets announced today. 6 of them. He stopped again. Let a moment pass. James Whitfield is one of them, 17 years old from Greenville. Takes bikes apart in his backyard. He reminds me of you. Not in his face, in the way he moves when he's working. That forward-leaning thing. He touched the frame of the photograph. You had that, like you were always moving towards something. He stood there another moment, then he straightened, picked up his coffee mug, went back to his workbench, and waited for the world to arrive. It arrived at 8 a.m., and it did not stop arriving. By 9:30, there were more motorcycles in the gravel lot and along Highway 61 than Elijah had ever seen in one place outside of a rally. Sandra's team had anticipated crowds, but the actual number was exceeding estimates, and she was on her phone managing the overflow with the focused energy of a woman who was good at this and knew it and didn't need anyone to confirm it. Roy was there. He'd driven up from Biloxi, and he walked in the door with his helmet under his arm and his barrel chest and his face that looked exactly the same as it had at 2 in the morning in a flooding garage, and he shook Elijah's hand the same way he'd shaken it, then direct, meaningful, the shake of a man who didn't give shit unless he meant it. Josephine, Elijah said immediately. Roy's face did something complicated. She's parking her bike, he said. She rode up. On the shadow. His voice had the specific quality of a father who was still catching up to who his child had become. 4 hours, by herself. Wouldn't let me ride ahead of her. He shook his head. She said she wanted to arrive on her own. Elijah nodded slowly. Good, he said. That's exactly right. Josephine Roy came through the door 7 minutes later, and she was 24 years old, and she had her father's physical presence and her own specific energy that was different from his, quieter, more internal, the focused intensity of someone who spent a lot of time alone with machines and had developed the patience that required. She shook Elijah's hand and looked him in the eye and said, "Thank you for what you said to my dad on the phone." "I meant it," Elijah said. "You're on the list." She looked at him steadily. "I'm going to earn it." "I know you are," he said. "That's why you're on it." Harold arrived with his son Junior, and Harold was wearing a jacket Elijah hadn't seen before. A new one obviously bought for the occasion, and the fact that the 74-year-old Vietnam veteran had bought a new jacket for this day meant something that went right past words and into the territory where things just were what they were. Harold embraced Elijah, which was not the kind of thing either of them would have predicted from the posture of either of them, but it happened and it was right. "Kill switch," Harold said when he pulled back. "Kill switch," Elijah agreed. "I've told that story 40 times, Harold said. "I'll probably tell it 40 more. "Tell it," Elijah said. "Every time." Carla arrived with Becky. The two of them came through the door together, and the difference between the Carla who had sat in the corner of this garage staring at nothing and the Carla who walked in now was not dramatic or visible to anyone who hadn't seen both versions. It wasn't that she looked happier, exactly. It was that she looked present, like she was inhabiting the same space as her own body fully without the part of herself that had been somewhere else that night. She went straight to the museum section, stood in front of the photograph of Daniel, stood there for a while. Elijah watched her from across the room and did not go to her because she didn't need him to. She had something to say to that photograph on her own terms, and she was saying it. Becky came to stand beside Elijah. "She's different," Elijah said quietly. "Yes," Becky said. "That post she wrote," he said, "the one that got shared 40,000 times. Last count was closer to 200,000, Becky said. He looked at her. "That doesn't feel real." "None of this feels real," she said. "And yet," she gestured at the room around them. The 200 people already inside, the more arriving, the noise of motorcycles on the highway, the photograph wall, the Electra Glide, Marcus Webb's 16 notebooks on the shelf, the 3 training bays where starting next week the first class of students would begin. "How's the ride going this year?" he asked. "Planning stage." "We added 200 new riders," she said. "Word got out about what happened here. People wanted to be part of it." She looked at him. "We're stopping here, on the road, every year. This is an official stop on the Mississippi Valley Veterans Memorial Ride now. Permanent." He didn't say anything for a moment. "Marcus and Harold and Carla," Becky continued, "they pushed for it. Nobody voted against it." She paused. "It was unanimous." He nodded, once. The way he nodded when something was too large to respond to proportionally, and the nod was the only right-sized response. William arrived at 10, not from the parking lot, but apparently from inside the building already, which meant he'd come early and been somewhere Elijah hadn't looked. And when Elijah caught his eye across the room, William gave him the specific look of a man who had been here before the crowds, because he'd needed to be, same as Elijah had. Same reason, same instinct. 2 old men who needed an hour alone in the building first. William came to him as the formal program was about to begin. Sandra had set up a small podium near the workbench, Elijah's choice of location he had refused to stage, and there were people 3 deep in every direction, now spilling out the doors into the lot. And the sound of it all was something Elijah couldn't quite categorize, this particular mixture of voices and engines, and the specific aliveness of a large group of people gathered around something they all believed in. "You ready?" "Shay," William asked. "I don't make speeches," Elijah said. "You don't have to make a speech. Just say what's true." "That's the same thing," William smiled. A real one, the kind Elijah had learned was rare from him and meant accordingly. "Yes," he said, "I suppose it is." Elijah walked to the podium. The room settled. Faster than rooms usually settled, which told him something about what these people were here for. They weren't here for noise. They were here because something real had happened, and they wanted to be in the same place as it worked. He looked out at the faces. Roy, Josephine with her father's hands and her own eyes, Harold and Junior, Becky, Carla, who had come back from the museum section and was standing near the front with an expression of someone who had decided to be present for her own life, Lou Garrett, who had come back every week for 6 months and filled 3 notebooks of his own, Marcus Webb, who was going to finish his PhD next year and had already told his advisor that his dissertation was going to be about the transmission of practical knowledge through non-institutional channels, by which he meant this garage and this man. Sandra, who had her phone in her hand but was not looking at it. Helen Park, who had her arms crossed and the expression of a curator who had put the right things in the right places and was quietly satisfied. James Whitfield, 17 years old from Greenville, who had driven 4 hours with his mother to be here and was standing near the back with the wide eyes of someone who was not yet sure this was real, but was choosing to believe it was. William in the corner, watching the way he watched. Diane Marsh with her notebook and her reading glasses, and the face of a person who had been covering this story for 6 months and was not done yet. And on the wall behind all of them, 42 years of faces, every customer, every bike, every year. And beside them, Daniel, 22, the grin. Elijah put his hands on the podium and looked out at the room and said the only thing he knew how to say. "I want to tell you what happened here 6 months ago," he said. "Not the version in the news. The version that's true." The room was completely still. "A storm came," he said, "and 120 people pulled into this lot because there was nowhere else to go, and I opened the door because they were in the rain and I had a door to open." That's the whole story. Everything else that happened, everything in this room, everything that's been built, everyone standing in it, all of it grew out of that one decision. Open the door. That's it. That's the entire lesson. He paused, let it sit. "My father taught me that the work doesn't care how you feel about it. It just needs to be done. My son Daniel taught me without meaning to, in the way that people teach you the most important things, that time is not guaranteed, and a door not opened is a door that closes forever." He stopped, steadied himself. There are young people in this room today who are going to learn to work with their hands inside these walls. There are veterans who are going to find in this work what I found in it, a place for your hands when your mind needs somewhere for its weight to go. There are techniques in those notebooks on that shelf that existed only in one man's memory until a few months ago, and now they will exist past that man, and the people who learn them will carry them forward and teach them to people who aren't born yet. He looked at James Whitfield in the back. The boy was looking straight at him. "That's a legacy," Elijah said. "Not the building, not the equipment, not the news stories. The knowledge passed from hand to hand, person to person, through the doing of the work." He looked at the photograph of Daniel. "My son didn't get to take his ride, but this garage is going to send a lot of people on theirs. And every one of them carries something of his with them, whether they know it or not. Because this place is his as much as it's mine." He paused once more. "That's enough. That's more than enough. It's everything." He stepped back from the podium. The room did not immediately applaud. It held the silence for a moment, first the way rooms did when something had been said that needed a second to settle into the floor before the response could begin. And then it began, and it was the kind of response that didn't have a ceiling to it, that just went up and kept going. Roy was clapping with his whole body. Harold had his fist in the air. Josephine was smiling the way her father smiled, full and real, and without reservation. Carla was crying and not trying to hide it, and that was right. That was exactly the right thing to do here. James Whitfield in the back was clapping with the specific intensity of a 17-year-old who had just decided something important about his life. Elijah stood at the front of his garage and let it happen around him. He was not thinking about Carter Motors International or national news stories or 40,000 shares or 200,000 shares or the eviction notice that was under a rag on this workbench 6 months ago. He was thinking about a door and what happened when you opened it. And he was thinking that his father had been right. The work didn't care how you felt about it. But what his father hadn't said, what Elijah had spent 70 years learning, was that if you did the work anyway every day, without asking what you were going to get for it, without closing your door against the rain, the work gave back. Not always in the ways you expected, not always on the schedule you wanted, not always in a form you recognized while it was happening, but it gave back. It always gave back. 3 weeks after the opening on a Thursday evening, after the training, students had gone home and Sandra had locked up the documentation room and Lou Garrett had driven back to Memphis. Elijah was alone in the main bay, finishing a brake job on a 2001 Yamaha V-Star that belonged to a high school history teacher from Coahoma County who'd been a customer since 2009. He heard a knock at the open garage door. He looked up. A young woman, mid-20s, blonde rain damp, standing with the posture of someone who had been having a very hard day and was trying not to show it. Her car was visible behind her in the lot, older model hood, up the specific tilt of a vehicle that had decided it was done for the evening. She looked at Elijah with the expression of someone who was not sure they had the right to be asking what they were about to ask. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said. "I have a job interview in Jackson tomorrow morning. It's the first real interview I've had in 8 months, and my car just stopped. And I don't know. I'm sorry, your lights were on, and I didn't know where else to go. Elijah set down his wrench. He looked at her for a moment. He thought about 120 motorcycles in a storm. He thought about a door opened at midnight. He thought about what happened when you opened it and kept opening it and never stopped opening it, even when you had every reason in the world to leave it closed. He stood up. He walked to the garage door. He looked at the young woman, her rain-damp hair, her careful posture, her eyes that were holding onto something by a thread and doing it with dignity. And he said the same 7 words he had said 6 months ago to 120 strangers in the dark. The same 7 words that had started all of it. "Come on inside," he said. "Let's get you out of the rain." And the door stayed open. It had always been open. That was who Elijah Brooks was. That was who he would always be. And that, not the building, not the scholarship, not the cameras or the headlines or the billionaire's phone call, that was his true and only legacy, given freely every single time the rain came down and someone needed a place to stand. The door open, the light on, the man inside, ready to work.